Hi and welcome to WeAreNeo. Today is finally the day. We're going to lift up the container onto the concrete feet with two backhoes. They are already there. They arrived earlier than expected. Normally it's the other way, but now they're already here. So let's see. Paul already lifted the container with his shovel,
Mit der Schaufel.
and the same on the other side. That's how it looks on the other side. It's floating in the air. Just above the feet. Okay, it's slowly moving. Looks funny how it's floating. I just hoped it doesn't fall. A bit more.
Okay, yeah, here is perfect. But there,
Pablo, un poquito más. Stay.
So on the other side it's perfect, but here it's missing a bit. That's how the container looks on the feet. We just have to move it a little bit to the left, but it already looks good. Makes you realize how tilted the ground is. That was really fast. Within 5 minutes we were finished. Now we're gonna move the container a little bit to the left with the shovel of Paul's excavator. It's already standing pretty good. Just a few more centimeters to be perfectly centered on the metal plate. Now he hooks the shovel into the chain. So it's finally done. Exactly on the feet. We adjusted it a little bit so it's standing everywhere perfectly on the metal plate, so we can weld it down later. It's just in case of an earthquake it doesn't move, so we are going to weld it, but it's really standing very accurate.
Also,
I measured really well, and the container is also perfectly leveled, as you can see here, both crosswise and lengthwise. Couldn't be any better.
so my first little project is finally finished. It was a lot more work than I originally thought, and it also took way more time. also because of the corona crisis. But overall, I'm pretty happy with the final result. But of course, I also made some mistakes and learned a lot from it. And that's what I want to explain you now, so you can learn from my mistakes if you want to do something yourself like that. So the first criticism I received was about the concrete construction, that it was way too complicated for such a small project. And I would say yes and no. Maybe the whole base plate was unnecessary, and of course it would have been much easier to just put the concrete pipe right into the ground. But I think if you want to build a house with your container, then you should definitely do it like that, because first of all, that's the regulations here in Costa Rica. So the whole construction is earthquake proof, because without the base plate, the pillar could move down when the earth is wet, and in case of an earthquake, so the whole container could tilt a little bit. So I think that's definitely the safest way to do it. But if you only want to use your container as a storage room, like me, then it's maybe not really necessary. But since I also want to add a roof to the construction and the outdoor kitchen, I feel much more safe with this construction, and maybe I only could have saved $200. So I think in the end it's a good investment for the future, because this will last you 40 years or more. Either way, it's definitely important to reinforce the concrete pillar with some rebar inside, like I showed in the video, you can see here. And if you don't want to use a concrete slab for the foundation, then I would not recommend using concrete pipes for the columns, because they are very heavy to lift, so you need an excavator or something like a crane, and it makes the whole construction more complicated. Because in Europe or in the US you can just buy some cardboard pillars and then you can cut them on a certain length and they're much cheaper. Or you could also use like some wood planks and make a box, the same how I made the concrete slab. And with this you can also cut to a certain length, and then you don't need to dig the holes as deep as I had to do it. Especially on the one side, I think a half a meter of a column would have been enough, which would have saved me a lot of digging. And I think it would have been cheaper to do it with wood, and especially with the cardboard pipes, but those unfortunately are not available in Costa Rica. Another tip, before you dig the holes, you should measure exactly and stake out the holes with the construction like I did. And you should definitely leave a little bit more space around the holes, because the way I did it, there was really not much space left to even dig the holes with the excavator. So everything was a little bit complicated. And measure the exact sizes of the holes, so you only have to dig once, because in my case the backhoe had to come twice, which also cost me more money. And when you dig the holes, also leave a little bit more space around the wooden box, so you can remove the planks later on. And another tip is to use nails instead of screws, because then you can just split the wood off and don't have to use a screwdriver. So on one side I didn't have enough space to remove the planks, so I just had to fill up the holes with them, and I wanted to use the wood maybe later on. Another tip is when you use the water level gauge like I did, you have to be careful that there are no air bubbles inside the tube, because otherwise it will not work. I had one side which was showing the wrong level, because probably there was some air inside. So it's better to put some new water every time. So you have to be careful when measuring with the water level. But it works really, really well. Like my container is perfectly leveled now. Then another mistake I did was when I ordered the concrete, I didn't order enough of it, because I thought that 1 cubic meter of sand plus 1 cubic meter of stones equals 2 cubic meters of concrete, which of course is wrong, because the sand will fill up the air in between the stones, so you will not get more volume. So in my case I needed 1.5 cubic meters of concrete, so I should have ordered 1.5 cubic meters of sand and 1.5 cubic meters of stones, plus the cement. And there are some calculating tables you can find in the internet where they show you exactly how much sand, cement and stone you need for how much of a volume of concrete. Because the first time I didn't order enough, and the second time I ordered too much. So I could have saved some money, but I can still reuse it later on, of course. Then another tip is about mixing the concrete. So it's definitely faster to mix it on the floor like I showed in the video. But what I should have done is to put a plastic sheet underneath to prevent the mess, because afterwards there was a lot of sand and stones still left on the floor and also a little bit of cement, and then with the rain it becomes concrete, so it was really hard to clean up the floor later on. And the same also goes for the heaps of stone and sand you put on the floor. I should have also put a plastic sheet underneath, because I had to move it several times, the position of the heap, and every time there's some stones left on the floor and it's much more difficult to remove. With a plastic sheet you can just roll it together and then you have a clean floor later on. And this also prevents the concrete from getting mixed with the soil, which is not good. So better think before where exactly you put the materials so you don't have to move them out of the way later on, which I had to do several times, which was really unnecessary. So my last tip is about curing the concrete, which is really important, especially in the hot weather like here. So you should water the concrete 2 to 3 times a day for at least 7 days in a row, so the concrete can gain its full strength. And it's even better to cover the whole construction with a plastic sheet, so the humidity always stays inside and the concrete never fully dries. It's a little bit paradox, but the concrete actually should never dry. It should always stay a little bit wet, because the chemical reaction between the cement particles and the water is what makes the concrete grow inside and makes it stronger. Because if it gets too dry, it can start to crack up, which also happened to me. And then you should let the concrete dry for at least 2 weeks before you put some weight on it, and even better 4 weeks to reach its full strength. So I hope you can learn from my mistakes, but overall I'm pretty happy with the final result. And before I come to the end, I want to thank my donors from last month, which was the Moya crew, Stefan, Bo and Sandy, and I had my first Patreon, who would like to stay anonymous. So if you also want to support me financially, I put all the links in the description down below. And in my next episode, I want to explain how I came up with the channel name WeAreNeo and what it has to do with the movie The Matrix. So if you missed my last episode, you can watch it here again, where I put the whole concrete foundation. Until next time, pura vida.